The whispers in Millbrook Fields. If you ever find yourself driving through corn country at night, and you hear whispers calling your name from the fields, don't listen. Don't stop. And whatever you do, never, ever follow them into the dark. Because some soil never stops being hungry, and it remembers everyone who got away. I was 24 when I moved to that tiny farming town in Nebraska. My grandmother had left me her old farmhouse, and honestly, I was desperate. 3 months behind on rent in Chicago, my journalism career going nowhere, and my savings account laughing at me with its $12 balance. The inheritance felt like a miracle. The house sat on 40 acres of cornfields, surrounded by nothing but endless rows of green stalks that stretched to the horizon. The nearest neighbor was half a mile away. Perfect for a writer, I told myself. No distractions, just me and my laptop. The first week was peaceful, actually. I'd wake up to roosters crowing, make coffee on the old gas stove, and write on the wrap-around porch. The corn swayed in the breeze like ocean waves. It was beautiful, in that lonely, haunting way that only the countryside can be. But I was lonely. God, I was so lonely. I'd call my sister Emma every night, just to hear another human voice. How's life in the middle of nowhere? She'd tease. I'd laugh and tell her about the sunset over the fields, the way the corn caught the golden light. But I never mentioned how quiet it got after dark. How the silence pressed against the windows like something trying to get in. The first strange thing happened on a Thursday night. I was working late, around midnight, when I heard voices. Faint whispers carried on the wind, coming from the cornfields. I stepped onto the porch, listening. At first, I thought it was just the wind rustling through the stalks. But then, I could swear I heard my name. Sarah. Soft, drawn out, like someone calling from far away. I grabbed a flashlight and walked to the edge of the field, my bare feet cold against the dew-soaked grass. The corn towered above me, 8 feet tall and dense. I shined the light between the rows, but saw nothing. Just endless green corridors disappearing into darkness. Hello? I called out. The whispers stopped. I stood there for 10 minutes, heart hammering, but heard nothing except my own breathing. Eventually, I convinced myself it was just the wind. Or maybe a neighbor's radio carrying across the fields. Rural acoustics could be weird, right? But as I walked back to the house, I felt eyes on me. That crawling sensation between your shoulder blades when someone's watching. I turned around twice, sweeping the flashlight across the field. Nothing but corn, swaying gently in the night breeze. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the old house made me jump. When I finally dozed off, I dreamed of walking through endless corn rows, following whispers that called my name but never got closer. The next morning, I called Emma. I think I'm going a little stir-crazy out here, I admitted. Already? You've been there a week. It's just so quiet. And last night I thought I heard, Sarah, you need to get out. Go to town, meet people. Join a church group or something. She was right. I drove into Millbrook that afternoon. Population 847, according to the welcome sign. There was a main street with a diner, a hardware store, a tiny library, and not much else. I got coffee at Marge's diner and tried to strike up conversations with locals. Most were friendly enough, in that polite, reserved way of small-town people meeting an outsider. But when I mentioned staying at the old Henderson place, their smiles faded. "That's your grandmother's place?" asked an elderly man at the counter. His name was Frank, and he had the weathered hands of someone who'd worked the land his whole life. "Yes. Did you know her?" Frank exchanged a look with the waitress. She was a private woman. Kept to herself those last few years. "The corn grows different on that land," the waitress added quietly. She was maybe 60, with kind eyes that seemed worried. "Always has. My daddy used to say there was something in the soil." I laughed nervously. What do you mean? But Frank just shook his head and turned back to his coffee. The conversation died, and I left feeling more unsettled than before. That evening, I decided to explore the property more thoroughly. Maybe understanding the land would help me feel more connected to it. I walked the perimeter, where the cornfield met the woods, and found something strange. There was a perfect circle in the corn, about 20 feet across where no stalks grew. The earth was darker there, almost black, and nothing would grow in it, not even weeds. I knelt and touched the soil. It was cold, unnaturally cold, even though the late summer air was still warm. As I stood up, I noticed something else. Carved into an old oak tree at the circle's edge were symbols. Not letters. Something older. Deeper. They looked like they'd been there for decades, grown over and scarred by time. That night, the whispers came back. But this time, they weren't just calling my name. I could hear conversations, fragments of voices, talking about things I couldn't quite understand. I put on my robe and walked to the kitchen window that faced the field. There, in moonlight, I saw them, figures moving between the corn rows. Tall, thin shapes that seemed to glide rather than walk. They appeared and disappeared between the stalks like shadows made of smoke. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone and called Emma. It rang and rang, then went to voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. The clock read 2:17 a.m. The figures were getting closer to the house. I locked every door, every window, and sat in the living room with a baseball bat I'd found in the closet. The whispers grew louder, and I started to make out words. Sarah, come outside, Sarah. We've been waiting. Join us in the circle, Sarah. The soil is hungry, Sarah. I squeezed my eyes shut and covered my ears, but the voices seemed to come from inside my head now. Hours passed. When I finally opened my eyes, dawnlight was streaming through the curtains, and everything was silent. I called the sheriff that morning. Deputy Morrison was a large, practical man who listened to my story with polite skepticism. Ma'am, you're not the first city person to get spooked living out here alone. Wide open spaces, unfamiliar sounds. It can play tricks on your mind. I saw people in my field. Could have been teenagers. Kids like to party in the cornfield sometimes. But he agreed to take a look around. We walked out to the black circle, and his expression changed when he saw it. Haven't seen this before. What do you think it is? He was quiet for a long moment, studying the carved symbols on the tree. My grandfather used to tell stories about this land. Said the native tribes avoided it, called it hungry ground. Hungry for what? But he just shook his head and suggested I might want to consider selling the property. Some places, they're not meant for living. That night, I decided to stay awake and document everything. If something was happening, I wanted proof. I set up my laptop by the window and started recording video. For hours, nothing happened. I was starting to feel foolish when, around 3 a.m., the whispers began again. This time I could see them clearly on camera. Dozens of figures emerging from the corn, moving in a slow procession toward the black circle. They were tall and unnaturally thin. And as they got closer, I realized with horror that they had no faces. Just smooth skin where features should be. They gathered around the circle and began to dance, I suppose. A slow, swaying movement that made my stomach churn. The whispers became a chant, words in a language that hurt to hear. Then one of them turned toward the house. Even without eyes, I knew it was looking directly at me. It raised one impossibly long arm and pointed at my window. The others turned too, all of them facing the house now. The chanting stopped. In a sudden silence, I heard my grandmother's voice. Sarah, honey, come outside. Grandmother's waiting. But my grandmother had been dead for 2 years. I grabbed my keys and ran. I didn't pack, didn't take anything but my laptop and purse. I drove straight through the night to Chicago, not stopping until I was back in my sister's apartment. Emma took one look at me and knew something was seriously wrong. Jesus, Sarah, you look like you've seen a ghost. I need to sell the farm. What happened? I showed her the video I'd recorded. We watched it together, and my blood turned to ice. The recording showed me sitting by the window for hours, but the field was completely empty. No figures, no chanting. Just corn swaying in the breeze. Sarah, there's nothing there. But I knew what I'd seen, what I'd heard. I hired a real estate agent the next day and put the property up for sale. It took 6 months to find a buyer, a young couple from Denver who wanted to start an organic farm. I felt sick signing those papers, knowing what I was passing on to them. The sale closed in March. In May, I got a call from Deputy Morrison. Miss Henderson? I'm sorry to tell you this, but there's been an incident at your old property. The couple had disappeared. Their car was still there, their belongings untouched. But they were gone. The only trace was 2 sets of footprints leading into the cornfield, ending abruptly at the black circle. The soil there was darker than ever, and according to the forensics team, it was rich with nitrogen, the kind that comes from decomposing organic matter. I never went back to Millbrook, but sometimes, late at night in my Chicago apartment, I still hear the whispers. They're fainter now, but they're there, calling my name, promising that the soil is still hungry, still waiting. And the worst part? Sometimes I want to answer.
The old farm's secret. Have you ever inherited something that you wished you could give back? I did. And now I understand why my grandfather never talked about the family farm. My name is Michael, and I'm 31 years old. 3 months ago, I thought I was getting the chance of a lifetime. But some gifts come with a price that's too terrible to pay. It started last September when my grandfather passed away. We weren't close. He'd always been distant, almost cold. But to everyone's surprise, he left me his farm in rural Montana. 200 acres of prime land, an old farmhouse, and several outbuildings. My cousins were furious. They'd expected to inherit everything. Why would he leave it to you? My cousin Jake demanded at the funeral. You've never even visited the place. He was right. Grandpa had always made excuses when we asked to see the farm. It's not ready for visitors, he'd say, or maybe next year. Now I know why. The lawyer handling the estate, Mr. Henderson, seemed nervous when he handed me the keys. His hands were shaking slightly, and he kept glancing at the manila folder containing the property documents. Your grandfather left you this, he said, sliding a sealed envelope across his desk. He was very specific. You're not to open it until you've spent at least 1 night on the property. The envelope felt thick, heavy. My name was written on it in my grandfather's careful handwriting, but underneath, in different ink, were the words, "When you're ready to understand." I drove out to the farm the following weekend, curious and excited. The property was beautiful, rolling hills covered in golden wheat, a crystal-clear stream running along the western border, and the Rocky Mountains rising majestically in the distance. It looked like something from a postcard. The farmhouse was old but solid, built sometime in the 1920s. White clapboard siding, a wraparound porch, and tall windows that caught the afternoon sun. It should have felt welcoming, but something was off. The silence was too complete. No birds singing, no insects buzzing, no cattle lowing in the distance. Just nothing. Even the wind seemed muted, as if the land itself was holding its breath. I spent that first day exploring, taking inventory of what I'd inherited. The barn was massive, with a hayloft that stretched the entire length of the building. The other outbuildings included a chicken coop, a tool shed, and something that looked like it might have been a smokehouse. All of them were in surprisingly good condition, as if they'd been recently maintained. But there were no animals anywhere. No chickens, no cattle, no horses. Not even a barn cat. For a working farm, it was eerily empty. As evening approached, I decided to settle in for the night. The farmhouse had electricity and running water, though the wiring looked ancient and the pipes groaned ominously. I found some canned goods in the pantry and made myself a simple dinner. That's when I heard it for the first time. A sound like crying coming from somewhere outside. Soft, heartbroken sobbing that seemed to drift on the wind. I stepped out onto the porch, listening carefully. The sound was coming from the direction of the barn, but as I walked toward it, the crying stopped abruptly. The barn doors were closed, secured with a heavy padlock. I didn't have the key, and when I tried to peer through the gaps between the boards, I couldn't see anything in the darkness inside. I told myself it was probably just the wind. Old buildings make all sorts of strange sounds. But that night, lying in my grandfather's bed, I heard it again. Crying followed by what sounded like scratching, like fingernails on wood. The next morning I called Mr. Henderson about the barn key. "Oh," he said, and there was a long pause. "Your grandfather, he never gave me a key to the barn, said it was private storage, family things, you understand." But I didn't understand. What kind of family things needed to be locked away so securely? I spent the next few days trying to settle into life at the farm. I'd taken a leave of absence from my job in Denver, planning to spend a month deciding whether to keep the property or sell it. The isolation was getting to me, though. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, and cell phone service was spotty at best. Every night I heard the crying, and every night it seemed to get a little louder, a little more desperate. On Thursday, I drove into town to buy some supplies. Clearwater was the kind of small Montana town where everyone knows everyone else's business, or thinks they do. At the hardware store, I mentioned that I was staying at the old Patterson farm. The conversation stopped. The clerk, a weathered man in his 60s, just stared at me. "You're Patterson's grandson," he said finally. It wasn't a question. "Yes, I inherited the place. Do you know anything about the barn? I can't seem to find a key." The clerk exchanged glances with the other customers. An elderly woman near the paint display made the sign of the cross. "Son," the clerk said quietly, "if I were you, I'd leave that barn locked. Some doors are meant to stay closed." What's that supposed to mean? But no one would say anything else. They just looked at me with a mixture of pity and fear, then found excuses to leave the store. That night, the crying was so loud it woke me from a deep sleep. It was coming from right outside my bedroom window now, not from the barn. I grabbed a flashlight and rushed outside, but there was nothing there, just the empty yard and the silent buildings. But in the soft dirt near the porch steps, I found something that made my blood run cold. Handprints. Small ones like a child's. But the fingers were too long, and there were too many of them, 6 on each hand instead of 5. I took pictures with my phone, but when I looked at them later, they showed nothing but smooth dirt. By Friday, I was seriously considering packing up and leaving. But something kept me there. Maybe stubbornness. Maybe curiosity. Or maybe the farm itself didn't want to let me go. That evening, I remembered the envelope Mr. Henderson had given me. I'd been carrying it in my jacket pocket for days, waiting for the right moment to open it. As the sun set behind the mountains, I decided the time had come. Inside were 3 items: a brass key, a photograph, and a letter written in my grandfather's shaky handwriting. The photograph showed the farm as it had been decades ago, but it wasn't empty then. There were dozens of people in the picture, men and women and children, all standing in front of the barn. They were smiling, but their eyes looked wrong. Too bright, too eager, too hungry. The letter was worse. "Michael, if you're reading this, then the responsibility has passed to you, as it passed to me from my father, and to him from his father before. The Patterson family has been the guardians for over a century now, keeping them fed, keeping them quiet, keeping them contained. In the barn you'll find what's left of the Hartwell family. They came here in 1894, looking for a place to start over after some trouble back east. We took them in, gave them work, let them settle in the old bunkhouse. They were grateful, at first, but they weren't what they seemed. None of them were human, not really. They could take human shape, but underneath, they were something else. Something hungry. Something that fed on more than just food. They started with the livestock, then the neighbors' animals. Then they started looking at the townspeople with those same hungry eyes. I had no choice. My father had no choice. We did what we had to do to protect everyone else, but we couldn't kill them. They're not the kind of thing that stays dead. So we trapped them instead, locked them away where they can't hurt anyone. The barn has been their prison for over 100 years. They need to be fed once a month. The key will let you into the outer chamber. There's a slot in the inner door where you can pass food through. Raw meat, preferably. They get difficult when they're hungry. I know this sounds insane. I know you'll want to let them out to call the authorities to do the right thing, but you can't. If they escape, they'll spread. They'll multiply. They'll turn this whole area into a feeding ground. The crying you hear at night, that's how they lure people close. It sounds like a lost child, doesn't it? That's what they want you to think. I'm sorry, Michael. I'm sorry to burden you with this, but there was no one else. Jake is too reckless, Sarah too soft-hearted. You're the only one strong enough to do what needs to be done. The town knows. They've always known. They'll help you if you ask, but they'll never speak of it openly. Some secrets are too dangerous to share. I know you'll think I'm a cruel old man. Maybe I am. But I've kept this valley safe for 60 years, just like my father before me. Now it's your turn. Don't let them out. No matter what you hear, no matter what they promise, no matter how human they sound, don't let them out. Your grandfather, Robert Patterson, and I read the letter 3 times, my hands shaking worse each time. It had to be some kind of joke, or maybe the ravings of a senile old man. But the key in my hand felt real enough, and the crying outside was getting louder. I should have left then. I should have driven straight back to Denver and never looked back. Instead, I walked to the barn. The key fit perfectly in the padlock. Inside, the barn was divided by a thick wooden wall with a heavy door. The outer chamber contained farming equipment, plows, harrows, bales of wire. Nothing unusual. But the inner door had scratches all around the frame. Deep gouges in the wood, as if something with very sharp claws had been trying to get out for a very long time. There was a slot in the door, just as my grandfather had described. And from the other side I could hear breathing. Slow, raspy breathing that didn't sound quite human. "Please," a voice whispered from beyond the door. A child's voice, weak and frightened. "Please let us out. We're so hungry. We've been trapped here so long." My hand moved toward the lock before I caught myself. The voice sounded so pitiful, so innocent. "We won't hurt anyone," the voice continued. "We just want to go home. Please, mister, we're just children." But I remembered my grandfather's warning. I remembered the photograph and those 2 bright eyes. "How many of you are there?" I asked. 7, the voice replied immediately. 7 children. The bad man locked us up and forgot about us. Our parents must be looking for us. 7. The same number of people in the photograph. "What year is it?" I asked. There was a long pause. Then, 1894. "It's 1894, isn't it?" I backed away from the door, my heart pounding. Whatever was behind that barrier had been there for over a century, and they still thought it was 1894. The voice changed then, became deeper, more adult. "You're Patterson's boy, aren't you? We remember your great-grandfather. He made us a promise." "What promise?" "That our children would be free. That the next generation wouldn't have to pay for our sins." The voice was definitely not a child's anymore. It was cold, calculating. "You're that generation, boy. Let us out, and we'll leave this place forever. We'll go far away, where we can't hurt anyone you care about. And if I don't, then we'll keep crying. Every night, louder and louder. We'll call to the children in town." Sweet little voices in the darkness, calling them to come play. Children are so trusting, so easy to fool. I ran from the barn, slamming the doors behind me and fumbling with the padlock. But I could still hear them laughing, a sound like breaking glass. That night, I called the sheriff. I didn't know what else to do. Sheriff Martinez arrived the next morning, a small woman in her 50s with tired eyes and a skeptical expression. "You want to report what exactly?" she asked. "There are people locked in my grandfather's barn. They might be dangerous." Sheriff Martinez studied me for a long moment. Then she walked to the barn and tested the padlock. "This lock is new," she said. "Your grandfather had it replaced just before he died. So you know about them?" She didn't answer directly. Instead, she said, "Mr. Patterson, your grandfather was a good man. He kept this community safe for 60 years. I hope you'll be able to do the same. But they're prisoners. This is kidnapping, false imprisonment." "Is it?" Sheriff Martinez looked at me with those tired eyes. "You've heard them, haven't you? The way they sound like children when they want something?" My grandmother told me stories about the winter of 1894. 7 families went missing that year. Men, women, children, just vanished overnight. The only clue was tracks in the snow, tracks that looked almost human, but wrong somehow. She paused, looking toward the barn. "Your great-grandfather found them feeding on what was left of the Morrison family. All of them dead, drained of blood, but still walking around, still hungry." "That's impossible." "Is it? Then open the barn, Mr. Patterson. Take a good look at your grandfather's prisoners. See if you still think they're human." I spent the rest of that day agonizing over what to do. Part of me wanted to call the state police, the FBI, anyone who might listen. But another part remembered the way that voice had changed in the barn. From child to adult in seconds. That evening, I made my decision. I drove into town and bought 50 pounds of raw beef from the butcher. He didn't ask questions, just loaded it into my truck with the same sad expression everyone else had been giving me. Back at the farm, I approached the barn as the sun was setting. The crying had started again, louder than ever. But now I could hear other voices joining in, adult voices, singing lullabies in languages I didn't recognize. I opened the outer door and pushed the meat through the slot in the inner door. The singing stopped immediately, replaced by sounds I don't want to describe. Wet sounds. Hungry sounds. When it was quiet again, the child's voice returned. But now I could hear the mockery in it. "Thank you, Michael. You're a good boy, just like your grandfather. We'll be quiet now. For a while." That was 3 months ago. I still live on the farm, keeping watch, feeding them once a month. The townspeople nod to me on the street now. I'm part of their conspiracy of silence, their shared burden. But I've been doing research. Old newspapers, historical records, genealogical databases. The Hartwell family did exist. They were wanted for a series of brutal murders across 3 states. Entire families found dead, drained of blood, mutilated beyond recognition. And I found something else. Something that keeps me awake at night. Last week, a family with 7 children moved into the old Morrison place 5 miles down the road. They seemed nice enough, friendly, helpful, always eager to lend a hand. But their eyes are too bright, too eager, too hungry. And every night now, I hear two sets of voices from the barn. The original 7, and 7 new ones singing together in perfect harmony. I think that they've been escaping. I think they've been feeding. And I think they've been replacing the people they kill, taking their shapes, their memories, their lives. The lock on the barn door is still secure, but there might be more than one way out of a century-old building. I started sleeping with a shotgun next to my bed, but I don't know if bullets can stop whatever they really are. I've thought about burning the barn down, but what if that just sets them free? So I keep feeding them, keep pretending everything is normal, keep hoping that someone smarter than me will figure out what to do. But if you ever find yourself driving through rural Montana, and you see a farm that's too quiet, too empty, too perfect, keep driving. Don't stop to help if you hear crying in the night. And if you meet a friendly family with 7 children who seem eager to invite you in for dinner, remember that some appetites can never be satisfied. The farm is still for sale if anyone's interested. But the new owners would inherit certain responsibilities. Sweet dreams, neighbors.
A whisper in the wheat. I'm not sure if I'm crazy, or if what happened to me last summer was real. But I need to tell someone. So, here goes. I moved to a small farmhouse in rural Ohio, chasing quiet. The city was too loud, too fast, and I was tired. Tired of people, tired of noise, tired of myself. The house was old, sagging, with creaky floors and peeling paint. But it was cheap, surrounded by endless wheat fields that swayed like a golden ocean under the moonlight. It felt like a fresh start at first. The first night, I sat on the porch, sipping coffee, listening to the crickets. The air was warm, thick with the smell of earth and cut grass. I felt alone, but not lonely. Not yet. That's when I heard it. A whisper. Not words, just a low, breathy sound. Like someone exhaling too close to your ear. I froze, cup halfway to my lips. The wheat rustled, but there was no wind. I told myself it was nothing. Just the countryside playing tricks. The next morning, I found footprints in the dirt outside my bedroom window. Bare feet, small, like a child's, pressed deep into the soil. I lived alone. No neighbors for miles. My stomach twisted, but I brushed it off. Maybe I'd walked there myself. Barefoot and forgotten. I was stressed, right? That's what I told myself. Days passed, and the house felt heavy. The air was always cold, even in July. Doors creaked open when I swore I'd close them. At night I'd hear footsteps, soft, deliberate, like someone tiptoeing across the wooden floors. I'd check every room, flashlight shaking in my hand, but find nothing. Just dust and shadows. One evening, I was cooking dinner. Boxed mac and cheese, nothing fancy. When the lights flickered, not once but 3 times, like a heartbeat. I stood there, spoon in hand, staring at the bulb above the stove. Then heard it again. The whisper. Closer this time, right behind me. I spun around, heart pounding, but the kitchen was empty. The air smelled wrong, like damp earth and something sour like rot. I checked the windows and the doors, all locked. I didn't sleep that night. I started texting my sister Emma about it. She lived 3 states away, but was the only person I trusted. "You're just spooked," she said. "Old houses make noises. Get a dog." I laughed it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting. A week later, I found it. A notebook, tucked under a loose floorboard in the attic. The pages were yellowed, filled with childish scribbles, drawings of wheat fields, stick figures, and eyes? Hundreds of eyes, staring from the pages, some crying, some blank. At the bottom of one page, in shaky handwriting, was a name. Elijah. I didn't know any Elijah. But the name felt heavy, like it carried a weight I couldn't understand. That night, the whispers turned into words. Elijah, come play. The voice was soft, high-pitched, like a child's. But it echoed in my skull. I bolted upright in bed, sweat soaking my shirt. The room was pitch black, but I could feel it. Something standing at the foot of my bed. I fumbled for my phone, the light cutting through the dark. Nothing. Just my empty room, the air thick with that sour, rotting smell. I texted Emma again, frantic. Something's wrong with this house. I'm hearing things. She called me, her voice calm but worried. Leave, Sarah. Just pack a bag and go. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But I couldn't afford a hotel, and the nearest town was an hour away. I told her I'd be fine. I wasn't. The next day, I drove to the library in town, digging through old records. The house had a history. In 1983, a boy named Elijah Harper, age 9, vanished from the property. The article said he'd been playing in the wheat fields and never came home. His parents searched for weeks, but the police found nothing. No body, no trace. Just gone. That night, I boarded up the windows. I don't know why. It just felt right. The whispers were louder now, constant, like a radio I couldn't turn off. Elijah, come play. It won't hurt. I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch, clutching a kitchen knife, listening to the footsteps circling the house. They weren't human. Too light, too quick, like bare feet skittering across the porch. By the third week, I was unraveling. I hadn't slept in days. My phone was filled with texts to Emma, panicked, jumbled messages about the whispers, the footprints, the eyes in the notebook. She begged me to leave, but I couldn't. It was like the house wouldn't let me. Every time I packed a bag, I'd hear it again. Don't go. Stay. The voice was inside my head now, clawing at my thoughts. One night, I saw him. I was in the kitchen, staring at the flickering light when I glanced at the window. A face pressed against the glass, pale, too pale, with wide, empty eyes and a smile that stretched too far. I screamed, dropping my glass. It shattered, water pooling on the floor. When I looked again, the face was gone. But the window was fogged, like someone had breathed on it. In the condensation, a single word was traced. Elijah. I called Emma, sobbing. I'm losing my mind. There's something here. She said she was coming, driving all night to get me. I just had to hold on until morning. But the house, it didn't want me to leave. The whispers grew louder, overlapping. A chorus of voices now. Stay, play, forever. The air was freezing, my breath visible in the dark. The footsteps were everywhere, above me, behind me, under the floor. I ran to the door, but it wouldn't open. The knob turned, but it was like the frame was sealed shut. I pounded on it, screaming, until my fists bled. That's when I felt it, a small cold hand on my shoulder. I turned, and there he was. A boy, maybe 9, with pale skin and those empty eyes. His smile was wrong, too wide, too sharp. You're not Elijah, he said, his voice soft but slicing through me. But you'll do. I don't remember what happened next. I woke up in the wheat field, lying on my back, the stalks towering over me. My phone was gone. My keys were gone. The house loomed in the distance, its windows like eyes, watching. I stumbled to my feet, running toward the road, but the wheat seemed to shift, closing in around me. The whispers followed, louder now, chanting my name. Sarah, Sarah, stay. I don't know how I got out. I remember headlights, Emma's car, her voice screaming my name. She found me on the side of the road, half dead, babbling about the boy, the whispers, the house. She drove me to her place, and I haven't gone back. I can't. But sometimes, at night, I still hear it. The whisper. Come play. If you ever find a house in the middle of nowhere, cheap and quiet, don't take it. Some places, they're not empty. They're waiting.
The message that never sent. I'm not talking spam or a wrong number. I mean something that makes your blood run cold. Something that knows you. My name's James, and last year, I moved to a small town in rural Nebraska, USA. I thought it'd be a fresh start after my wife, Emily, died. But what happened in that house? It's why I'm telling you this now. I'd been alone since Emily's accident 2 years ago. The city felt like it was suffocating me. Too many memories, too many faces. So I packed up and moved to our old family home in Red Willow County, a crumbling brick house surrounded by cornfields. It was quiet, isolated, with nothing but the rustle of crops and the occasional howl of a coyote. I wanted peace. I thought I'd find it there. The first few days were normal. I spent them cleaning dust off cracked furniture, fixing leaky pipes, and ignoring the ache in my chest. The house smelled of mildew and old wood, but it was mine. At night, I'd sit on the porch, staring at the stars, trying not to think about Emily. That's when my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Miss me, James? My heart stopped. Nobody knew I'd moved here. Nobody had this number except my sister Claire, who was back in Chicago. I typed back, "Who is this?" No reply. Just silence. I told myself it was a prank, but my hands were shaking. The next morning I found the front door ajar. I'd locked it. I always lock it. The air inside felt wrong. Heavy, like someone had been there. I checked every room, but nothing was missing. Just a faint smell like lavender perfume. Emily's perfume. My stomach twisted, but I pushed it down. Grief plays tricks, right? That's what I told myself. Days passed, and the messages kept coming. Always at night, always from that same unknown number. Why did you leave me? I'm still here, James. Each one felt like a knife. I called the number once, but it was dead, disconnected, the operator said. I texted Claire about it, and she told me to block the number, get some sleep. But I couldn't. The house was too quiet, and then, it wasn't. Soft footsteps padded across the roof at night. A creak from the attic. A whisper, so faint I thought I imagined it. James. It sounded like her. I started avoiding my phone, but that didn't stop it. One night, the screen lit up on its own. No notification, just a photo. A blurry image of me, sleeping in bed, taken from above. My breath caught in my throat. I lived alone. No one could have taken that. I tore through the house, checking locks, windows, closets. Nothing. But the air was cold now. Unnaturally cold, and that lavender scent was everywhere. I drove to the town library, a rundown building with dusty records. I needed answers. The librarian, an old woman with trembling hands, knew the house. Bad history, she muttered. In 1995, a woman had died there, strangled by her husband on their wedding night. He'd hanged himself after. The townsfolk said her spirit never left. They called her the Bride of Red Willow. I laughed it off, but my hands were clammy. Emily wasn't from here. This wasn't her. That night, I boarded up the windows. The messages were relentless now. You can't leave me again. Look behind you. I didn't. I couldn't. I sat on the couch, gripping a baseball bat, listening to the footsteps circling the house. They were light, like a woman's, bare feet on dirt. The air smelled of lavender and something else now. Something sour, like decay. My phone buzzed again. A video this time. I pressed play, my hands trembling. It was Emily. Her face, pale and wrong, her eyes too wide, her smile too sharp. "Come back to me, James," she said, her voice echoing inside my skull. The video cut to black. I called Claire, sobbing. "Something's here. It knows me." She said she'd drive down, be there by morning. I just had to hold on. But the house, it felt alive. The walls creaked like they were breathing. The whispers were louder now, a chorus of voices. "Stay, stay, stay." My breath fogged in the freezing air. The footsteps were inside now, behind me, above me, everywhere. I ran to the door, but it wouldn't budge. The knob turned, but it was like the frame was glued shut. I pounded on it, screaming until my fists ached. Then I felt it, a cold hand on my neck. I turned, and there she was. Emily, but not Emily. Her face was too pale, her eyes empty, her smile stretching ear to ear. "You left me," she whispered, her voice slicing through me. "Now you stay." I don't know how I got out. I woke up in the cornfield, lying on my back, the stalks looming like a cage. My phone was gone. My keys were gone. The house sat in the distance, its windows dark, watching. I stumbled to the road, the whispers chasing me. "James, come back." Claire found me at dawn, half-conscious, muttering about Emily. She drove me to Chicago, and I haven't gone back. But sometimes, at night, my phone buzzes. No number. Just a message. "I'm waiting." If you ever move to a quiet house in the countryside, check its history. Some ghosts, they don't let go. The whispering fields. Have you ever heard corn whispering your name in the dead of night? Because after what happened to me last summer, I can't unhear it. And I need to warn you about something that's been happening in small farming towns across the Midwest. Something that nobody talks about, but everyone knows. My name is David, and I used to think the countryside was peaceful, quiet, safe. I was wrong. It started when I inherited my grandfather's farm in rural Nebraska. 300 acres of corn and soybeans, stretching as far as you could see. The nearest neighbor was 2 miles away, and the closest town, well, let's just say you had to really want to get there. I'd grown up in Chicago my whole life. Concrete, traffic, the constant hum of the city, that was my world. But when Grandpa Joe passed, he left me everything. The farmhouse, the land, the equipment, even his old dog, Rex. My friends thought I was crazy for leaving my marketing job to try farming. "You don't know the first thing about agriculture," they said. And they were right. But something about that place, it called to me. The house was old. Built in 1892, with creaking wooden floors and windows that rattled when the wind picked up, which it did a lot out there. The first few weeks, I spent most of my time fixing things. Leaky pipes, loose shingles, a front porch step that nearly sent me through the floor. But the corn, God, the corn was beautiful. It stretched in perfect rows, taller than me, swaying in the breeze like a green ocean. Grandpa Joe had planted it his final spring, and it was almost ready for harvest when I arrived in late August. Rex was my only company in those first weeks. Old German shepherd with gray around his muzzle and eyes that seemed to see things I couldn't. He'd been Grandpa's shadow for 12 years, and now, well, I guess I was all he had left. The first strange thing happened on a Tuesday night in September. I was sitting on the front porch, drinking a beer and watching the sunset paint the cornfield gold, when Rex started growling. Not his normal bark when he saw a rabbit or heard a car on the distant road. This was different. Low. Continuous. Like he was warning something to stay away. "What is it, boy?" I asked, scratching behind his ears. But Rex wasn't looking at me. He was staring straight into the corn, hackles raised, that growl rumbling deep in his chest. I followed his gaze. and for just a moment I could have sworn I saw someone standing between the rows. Just a shadow, really. A dark shape about the height of a person, maybe 50 yards into the field. "Hello?" I called out. Nothing. I grabbed a flashlight and walked to the edge of the cornfield. The stalks were so thick and tall, they formed walls on either side of the dirt paths between rows. I shined the light down the nearest row. Empty. Checked the next one. Nothing but corn stretching into darkness. But as I turned to head back to the house, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Whispering. Soft. Just barely audible over the wind rustling through the corn leaves. Like multiple voices having a conversation just out of hearing range. I couldn't make out words, but I could tell it was human. Or something trying very hard to sound human. Rex had followed me to the field's edge, and he was pressed against my leg, trembling. This dog had lived on a farm his whole life. He'd faced down coyotes, chased off raccoons, weathered countless thunderstorms. But whatever was in that corn, it terrified him. "Come on, boy," I whispered, backing away from the field. "Let's go inside." That night, I double-checked all the locks, and kept Rex in the bedroom with me. But sleep didn't come easy. Every time I started to drift off, I'd hear it. That soft whispering seeming to come from right outside my window. When I'd get up to look, there was nothing but corn swaying in the moonlight. The next morning, I convinced myself it had been my imagination. New place, isolation, probably just the wind playing tricks. I had work to do anyway. The corn was ready for harvest, and I'd hired Jake Morrison, a local farmer, to bring his equipment and help me bring in the crop. Jake was in his 50s, weathered face and hands that looked like they'd been carved from leather. He'd known my grandfather for 30 years, and when he pulled up that morning with his combine harvester, he had a grim look on his face. "You been out in the fields at night?" he asked without preamble. "Just once." "Why?" Jake spit it into the dirt and adjusted his John Deere cap. "Your granddad, he called me about a month before he passed. Said something wasn't right with this year's crop. Said the corn was different." "Different how?" "He wouldn't say exactly. Just that I should harvest it quick once you got here. And maybe you should think about selling this place." A chill ran down my spine, but I forced a laugh. "Come on, Jake. It's just corn." Jake looked at me for a long moment, then shook his head. "You city folks, you don't understand. The land out here, it's got memory, and sometimes it remembers things that should stay buried." We spent the morning setting up the equipment, and by noon Jake was running the combine through the first rows of corn. The machine was loud, drowning out everything else, which was actually a relief. I couldn't hear any whispering over the roar of the engine. But as the afternoon wore on, something felt wrong. The corn was yielding too much. Way too much. Each row that Jake harvested filled the grain bin faster than it should have. And the kernels themselves, they were perfect. Too perfect. Uniform in size and color, like they'd been manufactured rather than grown. "Never seen corn like this," Jake shouted over the engine noise. "Your grandfather, he might have been onto something new, some kind of hybrid variety." But I could see the worry in his eyes. We worked until sunset, and by then we'd harvested about a quarter of the field. Jake parked the combine near the barn and gathered his things. "I'll be back tomorrow morning," he said, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. "David, you might want to stay in town tonight. Get a hotel room in Millfield." "Why would I do that?" Jake looked toward the remaining cornfield, now half harvested with neat rows of stubble where the corn had been cut. "Because tonight's when they come looking for what we took." "They? Who's they?" But Jake was already walking to his truck. "Just stay inside, lock your doors, and whatever you do, don't go into the corn after dark." He drove away, leaving me standing in my yard with more questions than answers. That evening I tried to distract myself with TV, but the old antenna only picked up static. The internet was spotty at best. So I sat on the couch with Rex, both of us listening to the sounds of the countryside settling into night. Around 10 p.m. the whispering started again. But this time, it was different. Closer. And there were more voices. Rex started that low growl again, and I could feel every muscle in his body tense. I grabbed the flashlight and crept to the living room window. The harvested section of field was clearly visible in the moonlight, neat rows of stubble stretching toward the barn. But the remaining corn, it was moving wrong. Not swaying in the wind. Moving with purpose. Like something large was walking through it, pushing the stalks aside. And the whispering, it was coming from multiple directions now, surrounding the house. Then I heard something that made my heart nearly stop. My name. David. The whisper was soft, musical almost, but wrong somehow. Like someone who'd learned to speak by listening to recordings but had never actually used their voice. David, come outside. Rex barked once, sharp and urgent, then went silent. Not the silence of a quiet dog, the silence of a dog that had stopped breathing. I spun around, and Rex was still sitting next to me on the couch. But his eyes had gone completely white. No pupils, no iris, just white. And when he opened his mouth, the voice that came out wasn't his. The corn remembers, David. Rex's mouth moved, but the voice was that same raw whisper from outside. It remembers what was planted here, before your grandfather's time, before anyone's time. I stumbled backward, knocking over a lamp. The crash seemed to break whatever spell had taken hold of Rex. He blinked, and his eyes were normal again. He looked around confused, then whimpered and pressed himself against my leg. Outside, the whispering had stopped, but now I could hear footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps circling the house. On the gravel driveway, across the wooden porch, through the grass. Multiple sets of feet, walking in perfect synchronization. I checked every lock twice, turned off all the lights, and huddled in the living room with Rex. The footsteps continued for hours. Sometimes they'd stop right outside a window, and I'd see a shadow block out the moonlight. But whenever I gathered the courage to look, nothing was there. Around 3 a.m., everything went quiet. I must have dozed off on the couch, because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through the windows, and Jake's truck was pulling into the driveway. I was stiff and sore but alive. Rex seemed normal, greeting Jake with his usual tail-wagging enthusiasm. "You look like hell," Jake said when I met him outside. "Rough night." Jake nodded like he'd expected this. "They came, didn't they?" "I don't know what came, but something." I told him about the whispering, the footsteps, what had happened with Rex. Jake was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed. "I was hoping maybe this year would be different. Your grandfather, he thought he could contain it, control it, maybe. But the corn, it's not just corn anymore." "What are you talking about?" "This land, David. There's a reason it was never properly settled until your great-great-grandfather came along in 1892. The local tribes, they wouldn't come near this place, called it cursed ground, said something was buried here that should never have been disturbed." I felt sick. "What kind of something?" "Nobody knows for sure. Could be an old burial ground, could be something else, but every few generations someone tries to farm this land, and..." Jake shrugged. "Things happen. People disappear, or they start hearing voices, or they just change." "Then why did my grandfather stay?" "Because he thought he'd figured out how to live with it. The corn, you see, it feeds on whatever's down there, and in return, it protects the land, keeps whatever's buried from getting out." Jake looked toward the remaining cornfield, But when you harvest the corn, you remove the protection. Exactly. We spent that day finishing the harvest. With each row that fell, I could feel the wrongness growing stronger. The whispering started even before sunset, and this time I could make out some of the words. Gave us flesh, gave us voice, gave us form. The corn remembers, the corn provides. Now we walk, now we hunt, now we feed. Jake finished just as the sun touched the horizon. He wouldn't even shut off the combine properly, just jumped out and ran to his truck. "I'm sorry, David," he called as he drove away, "but I can't help you anymore. You need to leave this place, tonight." I wanted to. God, I wanted to pack my things and drive back to Chicago and pretend none of this had ever happened. But as I stood there looking at the harvested field, now nothing but stubble and bare earth, I realized something terrifying. I couldn't leave. Not because I was brave or stubborn, but because I couldn't remember how to leave. When I tried to think about driving away, my mind went blank. Like that part of my memory had been erased. The corn had been protecting me too. And now that it was gone, that third night was when I learned the truth. The whispering started at sunset and never stopped. They walked openly now, no longer hiding in the remaining stalks. Dark figures, human-shaped but wrong, moving across the harvested field toward the house. Rex had gone silent again, those white eyes staring at nothing. Or maybe staring at something I couldn't see yet. I barricaded myself in the upstairs bedroom, but it didn't matter. Around midnight, I heard the front door open. No sound of breaking wood or shattered glass. Just the soft click of a door opening like someone had used a key. Footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate, getting closer. I pressed myself against the bedroom door, but I could hear them in the hallway now. Multiple sets of feet, all moving in that same synchronized pattern I'd heard circling the house. Then, silence. A soft knock on the bedroom door. "David." The voice was clearer now, more human. Almost familiar. "David, it's time to come out. It's time to understand." Against every instinct screaming at me to stay hidden, I opened the door. The hallway was empty, but at the end of the hall, my grandfather's bedroom door was open. Light spilled out, warm and golden, like sunlight through corn leaves. I walked toward it, knowing I shouldn't, unable to stop myself. Inside the bedroom, my grandfather was sitting in his old rocking chair. Not a memory, not a ghost. Looking exactly as he had the last time I'd seen him alive, except for his eyes. His eyes had that same milky white film as Rex's. "Hello, David," he said in that wrong voice. "We've been waiting for you." "Grandpa." My voice came out as barely a whisper. "The corn is harvested," he continued, rocking slowly back and forth. "The barrier is down. We can walk freely now, thanks to you. What are you?" He smiled, and it was his smile, but wrong. Too wide. Too many teeth. "We are what was here before. What was buried here. What the corn kept sleeping." The rocking chair creaked with each movement. "Your grandfather understood eventually. He fed us just enough, kept us contained, let us whisper to the corn but never walk free. But now I've ruined everything." "Oh no, David." His smile grew wider. "You've completed everything. You've given us what we needed most." Which was a way out. I looked down at my hands, and they were changing. The skin was pale, too pale, and when I tried to speak, my voice came out in that same wrong whisper. "We need hosts, you see. Bodies that remember how to move in your world. And what better host than family? Than blood?" I stumbled backward, but my reflection in the bedroom mirror stopped me cold. My eyes were white, completely white, and I was smiling that same too wide smile. "Don't fight it, David," my grandfather's voice said, but now it was coming from my own mouth. The corn remembers everything. And now, so do you. That was 3 months ago. I'm telling you this story from my grandfather's farm. The corn has grown back, taller and thicker than ever. I tend it carefully, making sure it gets everything it needs. The whispering has stopped, because there's no need to whisper anymore. Jake comes by sometimes. He brings supplies, stays just long enough to unload them, never looks me in the eyes. He understands now. He knows what I am. What we all are out here in the quiet countryside. The corn protects the secret. But every few years, someone new inherits the land. Someone who doesn't understand. Someone who harvests too much, too fast. Someone like you might, someday. So I need you to listen carefully. If you ever inherit farmland, if you ever find yourself alone in the countryside with nothing but corn for company, don't harvest it all. Leave some standing. Keep the barrier intact. Because the corn remembers what we've forgotten. And some things should never be allowed to walk free. The next time you drive through rural America, past those endless fields of corn swaying in the wind, listen carefully. You might hear whispering. And if you do, don't stop to investigate. Just keep driving and pray the corn is tall enough to keep us hidden. At least, until harvest time comes again. Warning to listeners, if you've experienced anything similar in rural areas, please share your story in the comments. We need to know how far this has spread.